thank you everybody for joining us on Facebook. We got a couple people watching there. Thank you for everybody joining us on Zoom. My name is Dustin Thompson with the Delaware Sierra Club. And with me today is the wonderful Lori from Delaware Nature Society. Lori, do you want to go ahead and give everybody a little bit of background about yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm the Backyard Habitat Coordinator for the Delaware Nature Society. I do a couple things. I coordinate backyard habitat. As part of that, I train a group of volunteers called Habitat Stewards. I help you, and my volunteers, more than I do, help you get certified. I also am responsible for the Delaware Nature Society's native plant sale, and we've got a fall native plant sale coming up online in a couple of weeks. And I also monitor conservation easements. So the Delaware Nature Society has about 50 conservation easements, and all of them have to be walked every year to make sure that there are no violations, that everybody's doing what they're supposed to do. I am a landscape architect. So I've got degrees in design, and I don't know, what else do you want to know, Dustin? You're on mute.
There we go. That sounded pretty good. So why don't we kind of jump right into it a little bit? So maybe if we start out with the problem that everybody's, this is one of the more requested topics that I've had, is kind of how can we get away from using chemicals in our yard, and how can we use native species? Everything around native species seems to be a really hot topic right now, and get a lot of requests for this conversation. So maybe we can start with the problem, and then we'll kind of go forward from there. So what are some of the risks you would say and dangers? We can set the foundation here for using chemicals in our yard rather than going the more natural route. Maybe some things that people don't think about.
So first of all, let's start with poisons. There are very few poisons that are specific to just whatever species you're trying to kill. And what that means is, if you find a tomato hornworm on your tomatoes and you spray your plant with poison, you aren't just killing the tomato hornworm, you're killing the bees that come to pollinate the flowers. You're killing any other insects that are there. You may be killing the predatory wasps that are trying to use the caterpillar as food for the babies. So there really are very few poisons of any kind that only kill one species. Another example, rat poison, commonly used by farmers. Kill a rat, kill the owl that comes to eat the rat, or the eagle, or the whomever. So you're often killing other species. Kill a caterpillar, you're often killing other birds. Birds feed caterpillars to their babies. So you might be killing a baby bird. So it's pretty tough. And we have certain chemicals that actually go up into the roots of a plant. So if, for example, if you do neonicotinoids, which is a systemic insecticide that is injected into the soil and then it flows up through the roots of the plant, you could be killing any insect that goes to that tree. You could be killing birds, you could be killing bees, you could be killing caterpillars, you could be killing a whole host of other critters or sickening them, and not even realize it. Mosquito Joe is another good example. You mosquito bomb your yard. You're not just killing mosquitoes, you're killing butterflies, you're killing bees, you're killing a whole host of other insects that you may not have even known were there. And you could be killing the predators, the birds and the other insects that would have eaten those insects as well. So that's kind of an overview of the problem. When we use chemical poisons in particular, not only are we killing a whole host of things that we don't even know are there, but a lot of times we're using poisons when they're not the most effective method, for example. And a lot of times what we're poisoning doesn't need to be poisoned. It may already be under control. So you have to look real carefully when you have a pest. The first thing you need to do is identify it and know what you're dealing with, and find out something about, is that pest a problem? Are there other birds, for example, or ladybugs, for example, that eat aphids? Are there other insects or other birds or other predators there that are already controlling that insect? So knowing what it is, knowing who its predators are, and finally knowing something about the life cycle. If this really is a pest, what's the best way to deal with it? And 9 times out of 10, more than 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, you've already eliminated the need for pesticides because it's not a problem, it's already under control, or there's a better way to deal with it other than random willy-nilly spraying of poisons. In most cases, hand picking off something is the best way to deal with it. It's quick, it's simple, it only gets the one insect that you have a problem with.
Yeah, so you mentioned mosquitoes, which I think are probably, you know, I see yard signs. Maybe that's just the nature of it. I see the yard signs of people that have sprayed their yards and like, hey, you should spray your yard too, right? So maybe it's the most talked about pest just because it's maybe one of the most advertised, but it's definitely one of the more annoyances that I think people do tend to use chemicals and sprays for, maybe more flagrantly than they use advertise other sprays. So like, how can we use nature and plants to help maybe reduce the number of mosquitoes in your yards? Or what are some other plants or ways we can go about warding off pests in our yards or gardens?
Yeah, mosquitoes are tough. And I'll tell you that right now, I hate mosquitoes myself. I have tons of them in my yard. There are different ways to deal with them to minimize them. There are a bunch of predators for mosquitoes, including frogs and dragonflies and swallows and bats. You've probably heard of some of those, maybe not all of them. And a lot of times people say, well, you know, dragonflies and frogs, you need a pond, and don't ponds attract mosquitoes? Well, the key to having a pond that doesn't attract mosquitoes but attracts frogs is to have some way to keep the water moving. Mosquitoes breed in stagnant water. Most of the mosquitoes in our yards are breeding in our gutters and downspouts. And so the best way to get rid of them is to get the water, or make sure your gutters are draining and your downspouts are draining. Those black plastic hoses on the end that people put on the end of their downspouts, anybody have those? Every one of those ridges breeds mosquitoes. So you have to you should either replace it with something that isn't going to hold water, or make a point to get out there and take it off and empty it after every single rain. A lot of times they're not necessary, sometimes they are, but that's a real problem with those black ridged pipes. But most of us, I mean, I can tell you on my house, I have an older house, it's 1926, my gutters don't drain very well. And so there's stagnant water in them. I know there's stagnant water in them because I can see from the skylight in my living room the birds coming in to take a bath and drink the water there. So that's a problem. So, you know, having your pond with circulating water so that you can have your dragonflies and your frogs that eat mosquitoes. They eat mosquitoes both in the water where they breed, and they also eat the mosquitoes from the air as well. And doing things to attract the swallows and the bats if you can. Not all of us have a good place for swallows and bats. Swallows and bats tend to be attracted more to opener areas like meadows, particularly the swallows. But there are also other birds that eat mosquitoes. So just gardening for wildlife and birds in general is another way to bring in birds that'll eat mosquitoes. So that's just one example.
Somebody asked, do you have any tips about bagworms?
Bagworms are easy. You just get out there with your fingers and pick them right off the tree. When I was a kid, now you'll know how old I am, my mother paid me 25 cents for every paint can of bagworms I could pick off of our trees for her. And I picked off a lot. And during one summer, I picked off enough to put a serious dent in the population and never had to do it again. So that's not a difficult one. Those are fairly easy to control until your trees get too big.
So the answer is child labor then.
Hey, you know, kids love to do things that are destructive. So
I sold candy, so for like 10 cents a bag. So 25 cents a paint can. That's
yeah, there you go. Well,
that's a decent exchange rate.
Yeah, well, at least back in those days it was.
So probably one of the other more talked about or requested conversations is about composting. So I thought I'd kind of loop that in with this as well. So I've heard that composting, because the other chemical that people use a lot, I think, is fertilizer, trying to get that, golf course lawn, which we can talk about in a minute. But so is composting like kind of the answer to fertilizer? How does that work?
Yeah, a couple things. So composting is basically organic fertilizer. Um, if you, how to best start on this one? Um, Native plants. So we're going to get into native plants a little bit here, but most plants make their own ideal compost. So if you think about the woods, before humans came along and started using their weed blowers, Mother Nature, when she created the woods, set up a system that works pretty well. The trees grow their leaves at the end of the summer. In fall, the leaves fall to the ground. Mother Nature doesn't send in the winds to blow all the leaves out and then back up a truck of ground up tree parts to replace them. Mother Nature created the leaves. The leaves decompose. They put back into the soil exactly the same nutrients that the tree took out of the soil during the growing season. So it's perfect. It's nature's gold. So if you're growing native plants, you can easily put the leaves right back under the tree, rake them into a bed under the tree. You shouldn't be mowing under your trees anyway, because most trees resent that. It compacts the soil. But rake the leaves right back into your beds. And even plants like sunflowers and asters and a lot of those native wildflowers and garden plants that we use, they die in the fall, and come springtime, you can just leave them standing there and then go out there with a pair of rubber gloves, some heavy gloves, and just crunch them up. And that makes the perfect mulch for those plants right there and then too. And you don't have to do anything to them. They stand up through the year. Their seed heads feed the birds all through the winter when there's not a lot of food out there. Some of our solitary pollinating bees actually winter in some of those hollow stems. So just doing some things like that, creating compost, can be really simple things that you can do that are much better for your soil than, and much cheaper. You can buy fertilizers that are organic fertilizers, and they're pretty expensive. You can buy inorganic fertilizers, and believe it or not, most of those inorganic fertilizers are made from petroleum products. So if you think about over time what that would do to your soil to dump, just say, some car oil on it, you would never do that. But our fertilizers our non-organic fertilizers can actually deplete your soil and harm the microbes and the fungi and some of the other things in the soil that have symbiotic relationships with our native plants and help them grow healthy and strong. Let's see, there was something else I was thinking about and it is now gone from my head.
Well, while you're thinking about that, you had an interesting little factoid there about not mowing under your trees.
Oh.
So how wide of a berth should you give the underside of your trees when you're mowing?
So the easy answer is you want to not mow. You want to plant ground covers or something that doesn't need to be mowed underneath the drip line. So the drip line, if you look at a tree and you were to take a plumb bob or take a string and take it out to the widest part of the tree as you're looking at it on either side, that would be your drip line. But in fact, tree roots go beyond that a little bit. So the youngest, the tenderest tree roots are actually, maybe add another 10 feet all the way around, maybe more if you can. And again, if you look at the woods, Mother Nature didn't set up the woods so that you had to mow in there. So the larger of an area you can leave around your trees that doesn't get mowed, the better for the tree.
Good tidbit of information there.
Yeah.
So on the composting front, so how would you say you would get started on that? What materials would you say they need? I thought I saw like a program where you could actually pick up like a composting drum I don't know if that's still going on.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, I'm not sure if there's a program going on right now. The Master Gardeners at the Cooperative Extension do a great program just on composting. And so they have the formal composting. You take your garden stuff, your kitchen waste, and you put it in a compost bin. You turn it, and then, you know, it breaks down, and then you take it back out. And I would suggest have them come in and teach you about that. If I were ever going to write a garden column, I would call myself the lazy gardener, because I do so much in the spring and during the times of year that when you need to play with the compost, that I don't have time to do it. I used to keep a compost pile, and I realized that it was a waste of time. I was never taking anything off of it. And so I just started taking my garden waste and my kitchen waste, my green kitchen waste, and putting it right on the ground in areas where I wanted to build the soil. And that's good enough. It still works just fine. It's not as pretty. If you have ground covers or mulch, you might want to pull them back, you know, and put your kitchen waste and then push it back to hide it a little bit. But it does the same thing. And if you're working with native plants and you're putting the leaves back down under your trees, crunching up your native flowers and things so that they're returning all that stuff to the soil, that's really about all the composting you need. And I should say that native plants, most of our native plants, you know, they're here because they're acclimated to being here, and they don't want fertilizers. For the most part, it's the non-native plants that need fertilizers, or plants that haven't been planted in the right location, that aren't being given what they need in terms of light, in terms of soil nutrients, in terms of water. And so if you have plants that are kind of sickly, the first thing you should look at really is, are their needs being met? What does this plant need, and how can I put them in a different location or otherwise do something that will make them happier before I start putting fertilizers on? Fertilizers, they can run off and do some pretty nasty things to our water quality. Those of you, if anybody here lives down around the beach, you may be familiar with some fish kills. I don't think we had any this year, but we often have them in the summertime. And a lot of that is, it's a direct result of runoff of improper use of fertilizers. And over the years, the farmers have sort of cleaned up their act. And so a larger and larger portion of the runoff that's causing those is coming from people's lawns. So your native plants don't need fertilizers. And so all they need is for you to put their organic material right back on the soil for them. So there you go. Boom, I just saved you a bunch of money, right?
So Mary asked about ticks. So she said she mulches her leaves and uses a lot of the mulch for them put back under the trees, which she has a lot of. But she also has a lot of ticks. So do you have any tips for Mary?
So ticks, I was just reading Doug Tallamy's book, Nature's Best Hope. I don't know, I hope some of you guys have read it. If you haven't, I strongly recommend it. And he's got some question and answers in the back, and one of them is, what about ticks? And the first thing he says is that ticks don't run around our yard looking for us. So what a tick does during certain times of the year, which he says is usually May and June in our area when they're the most active, is a tick will climb to the top of a long grass, a stem, a shrub, a flower, and they will wait there at about, you know, waist high, and they will, I forget the word he uses, but they'll basically stand there like this and wait for you to walk by. And if you don't walk by, they're not going to land on you. So his suggestion is keeping your beds, you know, having some nice wide pathways so that you can walk through without having ticks land on you. Ticks are also eaten by opossums and some of the other wildlife. So if you're near a wooded area, you may have wildlife that can come in and do it. If you have pets, obviously you want to, you know, check your pets for ticks and try to keep them away from those long grass areas or tall flowers and shrubs and things as well during during those times when they're of the year when they're most active. Personally, I'd rather be out in the woods than stuck inside during tick season. So, doing tick checks is an important part of what I do. I'm not sure how well that answers your question. There are folks who would say the best thing to do about ticks is to have 100% lawn, and 100% lawn has other problems as well. You can do some barriers in your yard for ticks. Ticks dry out easily. They like humid places. So putting in a foot or a 2-foot wide barrier of stone or gravel that they aren't going to want to cross is one way to outline an area where, for example, your children play. So there are some things you can do like that can help you minimize your exposure to ticks.
And so Karen just put in a nice little tidbit that I'm going to pull into our conversation here. She said, speaking of wildlife, there is some evidence that spiders and praying mantis eat spotted lanternfly. I don't know if manti is the plural there, but I'm going to go with it. So that's just another reason to encourage insects and other pollinators by not using pesticides.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we're also we're also starting to see that some of the birds are eating them. Obviously, this is a brand new pest. We don't necessarily know the best way to deal with it or who's using them or how they're being used, but there is a graduate student at Penn in Philadelphia who is now conducting a study, and she's interested in any evidence of birds eating them. So if you've got a picture of a bird eating them, she's got her study, and she would love to have your photos. As an aside.
Yeah, but still do your part and stomp those suckers every time you see them.
Kill, kill, kill.
So we had another question. Not sure if you have any information, but Cami asked if there's any suggestions on how to keep away termites in a more natural way.
I don't know a whole lot about termites. I will tell you that one of the things you need to do is make sure you don't have mulch right up against your house, which is something you should do anyway. You shouldn't, mulch actually should never touch your plants or your house. Really, it should only touch the soil. If it's up against a tree, for example, it's a pathway for insects and diseases to get into the tree through the mulch. So you want to keep it away from the trunk, and that's basically the same thing for our houses too. So I think keeping it away from the base of your house, so it's not actually touching your house, is kind of important. Some of the pest people will tell you you shouldn't have anything planted right next to your house. I don't know if that's actually true, but I'll be honest, I've not done any research on termites.
So how far away from the, I don't know if the feedback's coming through or not on your end. How far away from the trunk of a tree or what have you do you want to keep your mulch?
As long as it doesn't touch, gotcha. Basically. You just don't want it to touch.
Gotcha. So question back on compost, is it advisable to put weeds into your compost if you're hand weeding?
So when I'm doing my own weeding, if the weed does not have seed heads on it, and if I'm not concerned about the roots taking hold in my compost pile, I will go ahead and put it on my compost pile. If it's got seed heads, or if it's something obnoxious like English ivy that can resprout roots after you throw it out, I put that in my garden waste. I live in the city of Newark, and every week we get a garden waste collection, and I put all that kind of stuff in the bin.
Great. Yeah, I'm thinking about having that. So I have the tiniest yard you probably ever see. So I've been my neighbor and I have kind of been splitting the deal with his yard waste bin. But I'm thinking about getting my own. So I always feel bad about, hey, can I dump my my yard trimmings in there? Anyway, so speaking of lawns, though, the American dream seems to always include this kind of golf course out in your front yard. I'm not really a big fan of that, but it seems like a lot of people want this kind of like single species lawn with kind of special dark green or super soft grass. So why, in your opinion, why would you say maybe that's not the best goal to have? And what do you think would be a much more ecologically friendly or sustainable way
Yeah,
to kind of imagine our yards here?
I'm going to share my screen here for a couple minutes. Um, and we'll go here. So here it is, lawn. What is it good for? Beautiful lawn. These photographs, it doesn't just happen by itself. That comes directly from the lawn care industry. Here's a lovely example of it, cross-cut and lovely accented with an invasive Bradford pear. But lawn, no kidding, it's got some issues. And I like to use this, I like to show this graphic over here. Some of our native wildflowers, some of the asters, some of our wild grasses, switchgrass, blue stem, beautiful blue stem. They have roots that go down 8 feet, 10 feet, sometimes more. But here's our lawn. It's got inches, these puny little roots that are, 3 inches deep. And if it doesn't have roots that are very deep, that means it has a hard time competing. And what that means is that it needs extra water when it's dry. It may need fertilizers. It probably needs weed killers. It probably needs pest killers. And for all those reasons, it's not terribly sustainable, and it certainly isn't very environmentally friendly. The concept of lawn comes to us from the British landed gentry. Anybody consider themselves British landed gentry? The landed gentry had staff and they had livestock, and they had a lot more money than we do. And so it comes from there. And the livestock and the staff tended the grass. Anybody have staff? Anybody have livestock? It just doesn't really make sense for us. And oh, by the way, their climate was a little bit different too. And most of our turf grasses are actually not Native American grasses. They're turf grasses that come from the British Isles and other European countries. I will say it has very little habitat value as the way we envision it. But the one thing that does love lawn is our Japanese beetles. Anybody have issues with Japanese beetles? Those beetles need lawn grubs. So let's see. Here it is. I found this graphic online, the staggering wastefulness of the American lawn. 45 million acres of lawn. That is the largest irrigated crop in the United States, and it's larger than the next highest irrigated crop in the United States, which is only 10 million acres. No, I'm sorry, 4 million acres of lawn, and that's for cotton in the South. So all that lawn that has no habitat value, Doug Tallamy says if each of us converted just 10% of our lawn to native plants, that would be the equivalent of something like 7 Yosemite parks. Think about that. Yosemite Park, that's a huge park. We count on some of those national parks. So here we go, 45 million acres of lawn. Lawn equipment, 2 billion gallons of gas, and all the pollution that comes from those, and the leaf blowers. And yeah, all the pollution. Chemicals, 100 million pounds of lawn chemicals and fertilizers annually, and 9 billion gallons of water a day. We have parts of the country where they don't have enough water for drinking. I don't know if anybody's been following the droughts in California for the last however many years. But some of us are just throwing water away, watering a lawn. So, where to go from here? What do I have next? So I always advocate for reducing the lawn. We consider lawn as kind of a default here. We don't think about other opportunities and options. But, give it a purpose. Lawn does have some useful attributes. It's good for walking on. If you have kids, you like to play croquet, or you got a dog that wants to run around. Lawn can be very useful, but in most cases it's our default, and we don't really think about it as anything other than a green carpet. So it's be very simple to start in just a few small areas to make your lawn smaller. And a great place to start is under your trees. And there are a whole bunch of reasons why you should plant under trees. I alluded to the fact that many trees actually resent being mowed under, but because it compacts the ground, and which is not very happy for roots. So under your trees, not mowing, putting ground covers in, some native plants, does a bunch of other things too. I talked a little bit about the caterpillars. There are 96% of all songbirds feed insects to their babies, and caterpillars are a huge part of that. So caterpillars are important if you like birds. And caterpillars have a symbiotic relationship with native plants. So, and actually most insects do, they've co-evolved with certain plant lineages to provide services to each other. Oftentimes, the insect is providing seed dispersal, for example, but not always. There are other reasons. So our native plants do best because most of our insects are native. And just one example of that, let me back up here and show you another slide. If I can find my escape button. Let's go here.
I see you have a slide for ground covers too. I just saw a question come up in the chat on what would be some good ground covers. We've got a few questions, but I promise we will get to your questions. But
so let me just pull this one up for a minute. Dr. Talamy did a study, looked at how many species of caterpillars use different plants, and he compared native plants to non-native plants, and he threw in some invasive plants as well. But our oak trees support a whopping 557 species of caterpillars, caterpillars being important food for birds. And so, and if you look down the list, you'll see typical lawn 0, English ivy 3. Oak trees also have those wonderful acorns that are really important for birds and for some of the other critters. There's blueberries, there's our asters and goldenrods, wild violets even. So native plants are more important for the Lepidoptera, but if you think about a tree, and there's 557 species that use an oak tree, but you can assume there's probably more individual caterpillars than that on a specific tree. The caterpillar, he eats, he gets big and fat, he's ready to pupate. What does he do? He drops to the ground. And he may be looking for a leaf to roll up in. He may be looking to burrow into the ground so he can pupate and come back as a moth or a butterfly. But if the ground underneath is mowed lawn, he may die. He may die when your lawnmower goes over him. He may not be able to burrow into the ground because it's so compacted. If he's somebody that's looking for a leaf, he won't be able to find it because there's lawn under there, the lawn's been mowed, there are no leaves left for him. So by putting ground covers there, not only is the tree more healthy, but so are all those caterpillar species that the tree has supported and that your local birds need to feed their babies. So it's doing a different thing as well. And in the fall, when the leaves drop and you rake the leaves into the bed, if you've got ground covers there, they're gonna stay there a lot better than if you mow that area and the wind blows and blows them all away. So that way it helps keep the leaves there, the leaves break down, go back into the soil again. Whereas if you're doing grass, even if you rake your leaves back and they get blown away, and so the leaves aren't able to do as much as they can in terms of fertilizer or soil building. So there's all that stuff. So going back to what do you do instead, we have some great ground covers. Some of our typical ground covers over here, English ivy, pachysandra, periwinkle, liriape, they're invasive. And what invasive means is not only are they not native, so they're not really providing any kind of habitat services, but they're also damaging our natural areas. So English ivy, for example, can be found in almost all of our woodlands up here in Newcastle County, and it's a problem. It displaces native plants like trilliums and bloodroots and other cool stuff. English ivy, you know, can actually take down our trees because they grow up high. They weigh down the tree. We get a good windstorm or an ice storm, and all of a sudden, all those leaves on the English ivy are weighing it down, and the whole tree can just break and snap off. So there's that. Ground covers. Here we go. Ground covers instead of mulch. We talked a little bit about that. Here we go. Mulch should be kept away from the trunk. So there's a good way to mulch and a bad way to mulch. But ground covers. Ground covers are certainly more sustainable. Mulch is ground up trees. So, you know, I don't know if people are actually growing trees to grind up for mulch or not, but it's really not very sustainable. We have some great ground covers. Here's pussy toes. We have golden ragwort, which is an evergreen that has pretty yellow flowers. A lot of our, we have a lot of sedges that look just like grass that you can use instead, and some that have other interesting textures. We have things like coral bills. We have a native coral bill that works really well as a ground cover. We have a native geranium that works really well, a little wildflower. So there are lots of great alternatives there, and a good place you can go. I work for the Delaware Nature Society. On our website, we have some plant lists. One of those plant lists is called ground covers for under, actually on the website, if you go to the website, it's called Plants for Difficult Situations. And there are some good plants there for a number of things, but one of them is ground covers for under trees. And there's a lovely list there of some plants that work really well. There's also lists there for things like septic fields and some other stuff, wet spots, dry spots, slopes, that might be really helpful in figuring out what you can plant instead of lawn. So all good options. Did I answer the ground cover question?
I think so, yeah. So is plants for difficult situations?
Yes. You can find that on the Delaware Nature Society website, which is delnature.org, DELNATURE.org. And if you go under, if you look under what we do, there's a category there for gardening for wildlife, and you can scroll down and there are some resources further down on the page.
So we had a couple other questions if we still have time. So one person asked, is there a variety of grass or other plant, maybe ground cover, that they can use to seed their yards that will help sustain native animals and not need much water? So this is from Gloria. She says she has a weed lawn, but she has some bald spots that she wants to seed, and so any recommendations?
Well, you know, just, you know, if you're, there are things that lawn does that, you know, lawn can be really useful, but a lawn doesn't have to be chemically saturated and constantly mowed. So one of the things you can do is to allow things like white clover and violets and wild strawberries to grow in your lawn. A lot of people think of them as weeds. Clover actually is nitrogen fixing, so it's good for the soil. It builds the soil. Wild violets are a host species for 3 different species of fritillary butterflies, among other things. They're also one of the earliest flowers to bloom, and so they're important for the early bees. A lot of people talk about save the dandelions, but quite frankly, my violets bloom earlier than those anyway. So something to think about there. So you can do that, and just mowing at the right time, mowing later in the day when bees are less active, mowing at the correct height, setting your mower blade higher. All those things are ways to have a lawn that's not as environmentally destructive as the chemically addicted one.
Can you seed for those, the clover or strawberry?
You can certainly buy white clover seed. Most definitely. Strawberry will probably be seeded in by the birds if you have any birds. So they'll do that. And the violets, violets are easy to come by. Just ask somebody that has some. we have some great Facebook resources related to native plants. And if you go on to the Delaware Native Plant Facebook page, there are lots of people there who would be happy to share their violets with you for free. All you got to do is go pick them up. So yeah, there's some good options there.
And just to remind everybody, so I've been keeping notes, a little bit of notes. There's a lot of information here, but specifically, I will be linking in on our webpage, the website you mentioned from DNS, the Plants for Difficult Situations, and the Delaware Native Plant Facebook page, which I am on and can attest that it's a great resource. Just wanted to check and make sure we didn't have any questions that did not get answered. We have one on coming from Facebook from Donna. Any suggestions for good soil mixtures for potted plants? Yeah, so for those that don't own a yard, how can we help rebuild our ecology if we're in apartments or anything like that, maybe through potted plants?
I laugh because my yard is beautiful, but my house plants struggle. So I'm actually not a good person to ask about house plants. Sorry. A good resource for that though is Gateway Garden Center has a gal that does beautiful container gardens, and can probably be a fun talk for the future.
Yeah, it's a great idea. Yes, and Karen mentioned Doug Talmey's book. I'll definitely put that on the website link where you could go to pick that up.
Yeah, and he has two books. The first book he wrote some years ago now is called Bringing Nature Home, and it's a wonderful, beautiful, easy read, and it talks a lot more about the relationship between native plants and the caterpillars and how those plant lineages work. And it's, like I say, it's an easy read, lots of beautiful photographs, and lots of good information in that one too.
Great. So I just want to give everybody a couple more minutes here to post some questions if they have any additional questions. But I have one still. So is there any, I do want to, somebody asked, so when I said notes, I just meant the resources that Lori had been, so I won't have a play-by-play because I've been hosting. But the links will be posted on the Sierra Club live stream landing page. So it's sierraclub.org. Put it in the chat here, /Delaware/live stream series. And live stream series has hyphen or dashes, sorry, in between each word. I put it in the chat for those that are on Zoom. So that while people are thinking maybe some final questions, are there any other tips or anything that you would like to give anybody on getting rid of chemicals and turning towards more natural and promoting ecology?
Yeah. Plant native plants. You know, if there are only a couple things you can do, you don't have to have everything in your yard being native, but if you can just start whenever you put new plants in or you take something out and replace something, you know, put back whatever you put back in, make sure it's a native plant. And if you can plant a native tree, that's even better. Not everybody has room for a full-size tree. So plant native and reduce your chemical use. And those are two really big things that can make a huge difference if we all do them. Doug Talmey talks about in his book, Homegrown National Park. And the concept there is that more of the land in the United States is in private ownership, like your yard and mine, than in national parks. And so the way to make a difference is if we can all just convert, you know, start planting a little bit here and there, and before long, you're going to see more monarch butterflies. You're going to start getting interested in the bumblebees. You'll see the birds, and you'll be hooked. And then you're going to start looking for all the good information. How do I get more of this? Where do I find more of that? How do I find native plants? So, you know, start small. Plant some milkweed. That'll suck you in when you see the monarchs. But yeah, and you know, take your kids and grandkids outside and let them enjoy nature too, and get them inspired. Give them a spot where they can garden with native plants. But plant natives and reduce or eliminate your chemical usage. Those are two biggies right there.
So somebody suggested also using yellow lights outdoors. And somebody actually asked if, I'm not sure if you've heard of this product or not. It does seem to get a lot of Facebook advertising time. Dynatrap. Have you heard of that before?
No, what's that one?
So I believe it's a kind of a light-based. So the one that I saw, I'm not sure, but it's like a light that attracts the bug, and then there's like a fan that like cools them down into this little trap sort of situation. So I mean,
Yeah, I'd be a little wary of those, just because there are a lot of positive, good, beneficial insects that are attracted to most lights. And you know, I'll use the example of the mosquito zappers. They don't really attract mosquitoes. They attract all kinds of other insects. When they've done studies to see what bugs they've actually killed, you know, it's like 0.1% of them are mosquitoes, and the rest of them are other beneficial insects. So, you know, lights can attract all kinds of other types of insects. They can also attract things like tree frogs, that are being attracted to eat the insects, bats, you know, other types of predators that want to eat those insects can also get caught up in some of those things. So I'd be real wary. And you know, you can find research online about a lot of these products to find out if they're actually effective. People are willing to sell you anything these days. And if you don't do any research, you can easily get sucked in.
yeah. So get more dragonflies, and you'll have less mosquitoes.
Yeah.
Somebody asked about wasp. Any tips for wasp? And then we kind of have to wrap it up.
Wasps are pretty interesting. Most of our wasps are actually predatory, and they are pollinators. And when I say predatory, they're often going after other insects. So they feed those insects to their babies. So for the most part, if you leave them alone, they're going to leave you alone. There are a couple of exceptions. The bald-faced hornets, you see those giant paper nests. You usually start seeing them right about this time of year. They can be very aggressive if you get too close or attack their nest. 9 times out of 10, they've been there all through the summer, and you didn't know they were there, and we start to notice them when the leaves fall off the trees. Chances are good they're not going to bother you if you don't bother them. Usually once we have a good hard frost, everybody's dead. They don't reuse nests. So there's really, you know, as long as it's not like right next to your front door or somewhere where it's really hard to avoid it, you can leave them be. The one that's a real problem is the yellow jackets. And this time of year, they're converting their diet from protein, meat sources, and other insects to sugars because they're getting ready for the winter. And I don't know what to tell you about those. They mostly nest in the ground. So you want to keep an eye open. You know, they're mostly going to be in your lawn. They might be in some beds that have some bare soil, for example. They're not going to be in a good, densely planted ground cover because there's no way for them to get under the ground. But you want to kind of scan the ground before you walk too close. And if you see an area where it looks like there are a lot of bees hovering or coming and going, those are probably your yellow jackets, and you're going to want to avoid them.
I always see graphics of like different bees in Delaware. And there's one that goes around that cracks me up every time I see it. Basically, it kind of talks about, you know, bumblebees are the friendly, like they're going to bump into you and you can actually like pet them and like, you know, always lift up the bumblebees. And then, you know, carpenter bees that, you know, they're not going to hurt you and this, that, and the other. And then it gets the yellow jackets, like they're just jerks or worse.
Yeah.
And
yeah. And I do want to say one other one. The cicada killers are a really large bee. They look really mean and nasty. They actually don't have a way to sting you. Their entire defense is looking really mean and nasty. And they do nest in the ground. But they're out there looking for cicadas. So every once in a while you might get lucky and see one actually dragging a cicada back to their nest in the ground. And they basically stun them, take them back there. They're still alive for their babies to eat. So you don't need to hurt them. They look really mean and nasty. And sometimes if you've got like a thin lawn, it might seem like you've got hundreds of them, and every time you walk through, it seems like they're all up in your face. But if you don't bother them, they won't bother you. Really, honest to God. As mean looking as they look, they're really safe.
Great. Well, I really appreciate, and so I love all the work that DNS does, and thank you for your time, of course, here today. Is there anything people can keep an eye out? I think you mentioned a plant sale coming up, or any way?
Yeah, we have a plant sale coming up. It's online, it's virtual, it's smaller than normal. This is our first fall plant sale. You can preview the plants online at the Delaware Nature Society webpage. Go to the events tab and click on native plant sale, and you can click on preview to see what we have for sale. The sale will actually go live on the morning of October the 9th. We plan for it to be open from October the 9th through the 12th. We planned for a 4 or 5 day opening of our sale last spring, and we had to close it within about 5 hours because we ran out of pickup slots. So we'll see how this goes. This is a new one for us. It's a little bit different, but that's coming up in October. And then we also have habitat steward training coming up, and that is now available online for registration. If you go to our events page and click on programs, you can find that in there starting on October 28th if you go to the program calendar. And that's basically the purpose of that, is to teach you everything you need to know so that you can garden for wildlife and so that you can help other people garden for wildlife too. And that's going to be all Zoom this year. We've never done that before. So anybody anywhere can take it. You don't have to worry about showing up in Hockessin or in Milford. So there's that. And I'm just trying to think.
In the world of Zoom, it has become much easier to get to classes on time.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I just want to end, I'm going to share my screen for just a minute to just give you some food for thought. Here it is. Here's the guy in his, 17th century clothing. We don't dress like this anymore, but that's the inspiration for our yard. So let's move on. Let's make our yards reflect who we are and what's important to us, and not what was important to King Louis.
I love that graphic.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Well, I thank everybody for joining us today. Thanks for everybody who tuned in on Facebook and joined us here on Zoom. We'll remind you that we do these live streams every week. So coming up next week, we have a conversation about solar energy for all and what we can all do as individuals to help expand solar. We have Jeffrey Richardson coming on to join us for that next week. So it's every week at 3. If you go to the live stream series landing page, you can see our schedule for the rest of the month of October, and we'll have November dates coming up soon. So thank you again, Lori, so much for having this conversation with us today. And
thank you for having me.
Thank you all for joining. Have a good day.
See ya.